So good afternoon and welcome to this site event. As you know, this site event has been organized by the Global Foundation for Democracy and Development, together with the support of the Permanent Mission of the Dominican Republic to the United Nations, as well as by the Ubuntu World Forum of Civil Society Networks, which I'm representing. And it has been also being organized with the collaboration of the NGO Committee on Financing for Development, the International Trade Union Confederation, and the Center of Concern. And well, as you know, this is a site event which is in the framework of the sixth high-level debate on dialogue on financing for development. And the main topic that we're going to address today, it's the one which is leading the site event, which is innovative financing for the post-2015 agenda, the implications of a financial transaction tax. Although we are not going to speak only about the financial transaction tax, we think that is something important we should be discussing. I presume that most of you have the paper with the background of the site event, and there were some copies, but I don't know if they were finished or not. From our perspective, I think that this debate today is very significant because innovative financing for development has been an important topic which has been a bit unresolved. And this is not only my opinion, but this has been already stated in the opening debate of this morning by several people, including the Secretary General of the UNCTAD. But I think that it's important that in the current context and the very substantive debates that today we have about the post-2015 development agenda, we have this site event today to discuss the implications of these different agendas together with all the question on innovative financing, and specifically the question of financial transaction tax. Since we don't have that much time, because as you know, site events are limited on time, I think that the best thing is that we proceed with the different interventions that we're going to have today. I think that we have a very interesting panel. And we will try, although you know what happens from time to time, that we can also have some interactive, multi-stakeholder dialogue within the room, especially multi-stakeholder. Okay, so the first person who's going to have the floor will be Ambassador Luis Litgo, who's the Deputy Permanent Representative of the Dominican Republic here at to the UN, and we thank again very much for the collaboration of the mission, and we give him the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, Manuel. It's a great pleasure, especially to see my old friend Natasha, that we haven't seen for about 15 years, right? But she told me something good, though. She told me that I look better now than 15 years ago. Thank you. To Mr. Matt Simon and Mr. Gay and Eva and Phyllis. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We would like to welcome you to this side event, Innovating for the Post-2015 Agenda, the implication of a financial transaction tax. Let me begin by thanking the Global Foundation for Democracy and Development and the World Forum Society Network for the organization of this event in partnership with the Permanent Mission of the Dominican Republic. For us, it's a great pleasure, and we hope that this kind of event continue in the near future. This meeting is clearly an important one, bringing together the different sectors to get the insight on this topic. The Dominican Republic has succeeded in the consultation and financial and final adoption by consensus of the resolution 66188, excessive price volatility in food and related financial and commodity market, being a great contribution to the deliberation of the General Assembly on the ongoing impact of the global economy and financial crisis. There is a renewed interest for a tax on financial transaction in the context of the economy and financial crisis. Some argue that such taxation could reduce speculation or raise revenues as contribution on the financial sector to the cost of wire public support. Others underline that it may also finance global public goods development goal or climate change because of the significant amounts it could raise with a minimum distortion of the economy. This is something to be taken into account in the elaboration of the post-2015 agenda. This why this event is particularly valuable, and we are very interested in hearing of the insight of the panelists on this matter. Thank you very much, and we wish you a successful discussion. Thank you, and have a good one.
Thank you, Ambassador, for your words, and again, thank you to you and the whole mission for the support of the organization of this debate. Now, the floor will be for Natasha Despotovich, who's the Executive Director of the Global Foundation for Democracy and Development, and I have to confess that she's also a very good old friend. So
old friend.
yeah, there is a bit of a small party in this site event. So, and well, she's one of the organizations that has been leading this site event. So I'm very pleased to give her the floor.
Thank you, Manuel. I must confess that the previous speakers have made me feel very, very old. 15 years, very old friend. But I'm very thankful for being here, and I want to thank all of you for coming and attending this panel. And I also want to congratulate all of you that I know have been working on this issue. I want to congratulate the committee, the NGO Committee on Financing for Development, where recently our representative Margaret Hayward has joined the executive committee. I want to congratulate the DESA's Office on Financing for Development that we have been very closely working with. And I think we all trying very hard to see some change and some development in that area. As Manuel mentioned, I represent the Global Foundation for Democracy and Development, or as we call it in Dominican Republic, Fundación Global Democracia y Desarrollo. These are two non-profit institutions created by former President Leonel Fernandez, the president of Dominican Republic, and currently the president of both of these foundations. And here in the US, we are a 501c3 nonprofit affiliated with ECOSOC, UNCTAD, UNESCO, and DPI, and closely following the process of the United Nations. I'm going to start by giving some kind of a framework and introduction to the topic with some ideas and questions that I'm sure the panelists will follow on in more specific details. Since its adoption in 2002, the Monterrey Consensus has served as the world's template for the financing of global development efforts. It was a historic and far-reaching agreement which addressed the complex issue of how to finance the sustainable growth and development objectives of the UN's Millennium Development Goals established 2 years prior to the summit. Several important subsequent meetings and agreements have since followed, including the 2008 meeting in Doha, Qatar, out of which arose the Doha Declaration on Financing and Development, and more recently, as we know, Rio +20 summit in 2012, an international gathering organized to redirect and review global political commitment to the 3 dimensions of sustainable development: economic growth, social improvement, and environmental protection and sustainability. These international meetings and declarations have solidified the international consensus on the importance of financing for development and have given impulse to many new approaches and initiatives. Still, not very much has been done. The overall capacity for financing the development hasn't been either fully tackled or realized. Many private, public, and NGO institutions have done research and come up with their own statistics that bring the international audience's awareness to the potential of financing for development. For example, according to Tax Justice Network, between 190 and $280 billion a year is lost because of tax evasion in offshore banking. Oxfam has stated that around $50 billion a year is lost in revenue for developing countries. OECD has pointed to about $5 to $7 trillion, which represents between 6 and 8% of total global investment under management that go to tax havens. Christian Aid has indicated that around $250 billion a year go in tax evasion, and that tax evasion is responsible for around 5.6 million children deaths from 2000 to 2015. As we approach 2015, the original target date the UN established for the accomplishment of the MDGs, the issue of financing those goals remains an ongoing challenge, albeit one in which great strides have been made. The worldwide financial crisis of 2008 only served to highlight the urgency for more predictable international public and private financing, with the result that the search for new sources of development financing has intensified. At least the search has intensified. Countries around the world are already taking initial steps towards identifying and implementing a range of creative mechanisms for raising capital, which other nations, including many in Latin America that we are more close and familiar with, are closely monitoring and pursuing. Let us just name a few of these examples successfully implemented. In Chile, $2 levy on purchases of any international airline ticket generates enough revenue to cure 2 children of malaria every year. In the Indonesia Domestic Biogas Program, IDBP, a public-private collaboration with Nestle resulted in a program supporting small dairy farmers to invest in biogas digesters as an affordable and sustainable source of cooking fuel using local resources. This multi-actor project has led to the construction of around 9,000 biodigesters. And then there is solidarity tax. Solidarity tax programs between cities in France and their counterparts in the developing world have successfully raised over 30 billion euros per year for improving the water and sanitation infrastructure in places such as Senegal and other nations in sub-Saharan Africa. And maybe some of you have heard and know about the product trade involving the participation of major corporate sponsors, including the Gap, Starbucks, Apple, American Express, and other global brands, which has generated over $160 million for the fight against AIDS and tuberculosis. In partnership with JP Morgan and the World Bank, Gavi, the Global Alliance for Vaccinations and Immunizations, has vaccinated more than 288 million people in the past decade alone through the issuance of vaccine bonds. In a report issued in the second half of this very year by a world-renowned global management company, McKinsey & Company, 4 innovative and exciting ideas have been proposed as a means of raising new funds as society works to achieving the Millennium Development Goals, including unlocking value from diaspora flows, stimulating private capital flows, encouraging private voluntary contributions through matching funds, and tackling sector-specific inefficiencies. Each of these methods is very complex, involving enormous amounts of public and private cooperation, participation, and involvement, but they are all realistic, achievable, and most importantly, effective. Many of these new ideas have already been successfully implemented in India, Israel, Kenya, Pakistan, United Kingdom, United States, Canada, and some other countries around the world. I will not go into details, but I welcome you to check the report where they bring all the details and recommendations about the implementation. Although these new mechanisms of mobilizing resources for development have found enthusiastic trailblazers in private, public, and non-governmental sector, the potentially biggest, long ago identified mechanisms like official development assistance, ODA, and financial transaction taxes, FTTA, have not progressed in their implementation. The experts agreed that the quickest and most efficient way of raising capital is via financial transaction taxes on global financial transactions, including, as outlined by the then Dominican President Leonel Fernandez in his address to the United Nations General Assembly in 2009, a tax for development on capital deposited in tax havens, offshore banks, and international financial centers. The former Dominican president, who is currently president of Global Foundation for Democracy and Development, said, I open the quote, "The placement of financial resources in tax havens implies a yearly tax evasion of at least $250 billion. As we have said, this is equivalent to the amount of funds estimated by the World Bank needed to complete funding for achieving the Millennium Development Goals. There are abundant resources around the world. The problem is that they are unequally and unjustly distributed, and that is due, among other reasons, to the existence of a global financial architecture prone to lack of transparency, keeping secrets, money laundering, tax evasion, and fraud." I'm closing the quote. A financial transaction tax, or FTT, in general, is typically represented by a very small tax on trades of stocks, derivatives, currency, and other financial instruments, and is extremely effective in raising large amounts of revenue for urgent needs, while simultaneously discouraging the type of short-term financial speculation. So we are talking about the stability of the global financial architecture. And we are also talking about the financial governance, global governance. It is estimated that FTT could generate up to 200 billion euros at the European level and almost 650 billion at the global level. The concept of FTT is definitely not a new one, but because of technology, their implementation has become vastly easier. Since almost all financial transactions are conducted electronically now, an easy-to-follow digital trail makes tax collection much easier than it would have been even a dozen years ago. No matter what form it takes, raising capital for the achievement of sustainable development goals has become a worldwide concern. There have been many proposals for financial transaction tax implementation worldwide, and it has been applied in a limited way and with different purposes in about 40 countries in 2011. Still, its use towards combating poverty and supporting development in the poorest countries of the world has not been put in place. The G20 financial transaction tax, proposed in 2008, hasn't come into existence, although its many renowned supporters like Bill Gates, George Soros, Joseph Stiglitz, among other 1,000 economists and more than 1,000 parliamentarians around the world, have advocated its implementation and its use for development purposes and the achievement of the Millennium Development Goals. Bill Gates' report for the G20 summit in 2011 clearly stated that, quote, "Even a small tax of 10 basis points on equities and 2 basis points on bonds could generate about 48 billion from G20 member states, or 9 billion if only adopted by larger European countries." I'm closing the quote. He also clarified, as did many other supporters of FTT for development, that its implementation can be of limited geographical scope. It can start on a local level, country level, and still successful and extremely impactful. At the UN General Assembly in 2012, French President François Hollande declared that France would commit at least 10% of the recently established 0.2% tax on transaction revenues to development, saying, quote, "Let's introduce this tax across the world and ensure that revenues go towards development," closing the quote. Early this year, 11 European Union countries agreed to levy a coordinated tax on financial transactions, but its use for international development purposes is still unclear and uncertain. Though the Monterrey Consensus may have formally begun the discussion, the search for even more creative and ever more effective ways of raising development capital is an ongoing one which will continue to take a very central stage in all developmental economic plans. If we fail, all our good intentions will have been in vain. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Natasha, for such a comprehensive intervention, which helps us to be in the framework of the discussion of today, putting the relation of the innovative financing agenda with the traditional financing for development agenda. I think that you have highlighted some very interesting aspects, and you have been also commenting the question of the private role in innovative financing, but even for the data you have been giving, it's clear that what is still to be the central question, and that's also one of the aims of discussion of today's side event, is precisely that the core of innovative financing, if it has to be a significant innovative financing, has to be through the public financement and through these new mechanisms of the financial transaction tax. You have been talking also about global financial architecture and the need to address the question of global financial architecture. This is something we have been discussing for the last years, and Eva is one of the persons who has been mentioning that for a long time, that if we want to talk about global economic governance, we need first to tackle the main problem, no? And the main problematic is within global financial governance. This has been also very clearly highlighted here, and have been also mentioning the proposal of the financial transaction tax, that in principle it should be started to be implemented in 11 European countries next year, and this proposal by the French president of using 10%, let's say that from civil society 10% is a very small percentage, but at least is a starting percentage. So I think that in this sense this is an important question. So thank you again for your intervention, which helped us to put the framework for the discussion today. Having said that, now it's time for Gail Harley to intervene. She's a specialist from the development finance. Yeah, that's what you do. I never know exactly what was your position in UNDP and in the Bureau of Strategic, no, the Bureau of Development Policies. Yes, I was going to say another bureau, which is not her bureau. And she is at the UNDP, and she has been working in the question of innovative financing in a very interesting manner, and she has been also participating in the leading group on innovative financing for development, in which Ubuntu is also taking part. So I'm also very glad to have Gail here today with us, and I give the floor to her. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to Ambassador Lisco, thank you to you, Manuel, and also to the Global Foundation for Democracy and Development for the invitation to this afternoon's Party Among Friends. That's what we've decided it is, isn't it? So it's very nice to join this Party Among Friends. So how will Post-2015 be funded? Isn't that the million-dollar question? Or is that a billion-dollar question? Or even trillion-dollar question? Or perhaps, as my 5-year-old son would say, Mummy, that's the gazillion-dollar question. I haven't worked out how many zeros there are in a gazillion yet, but I think there are probably quite a lot. Let me start by saying that at UNDP we've been supporting a really unprecedented global conversation on what should succeed the MDGs when they expire in 2015. Close to 1.5 million people have now contributed to this discussion through 88 national consultations, 11 thematic consultations, and also through an online platform called the My World survey, which asks people to rank their priorities, what matters to them for the future. With the support of modern technology and social media, we've now been able to reach out to more people than ever before. And these include people from all walks of life who ordinarily wouldn't be asked about their priorities. I think that the interest that citizens have shown around the world in engaging in the consultation process, in engaging in a discussion about what succeeds the MDGs is very encouraging. But I think that also means that expectations are now extremely high extremely high, as to what the post-2015 development agenda should deliver. And I think this is a huge responsibility for governments around the world and also for the United Nations system. And as we look forward to the post-2015 era, people rightly want to know how that ambitious development framework will be funded. That's only fair. Where will the resources come from, and what will be the responsibilities of different stakeholders? Although the main ingredients of the post-2015 framework are still very, very much under discussion, I think it's fair to say that whatever global agreement finally emerges, it's likely to be extremely expensive to fulfill. So where will the money come from? I think before we tackle that question, I think it's important to place innovative sources of development finance maybe a little bit in context. The financial landscape has changed markedly from when the MDGs were agreed in the early 2000s. We see many developing countries have been growing fast, especially what we like to term the big beasts of the developing world. They've increased domestic resource mobilization capacities considerably. There's now much more tendency to depend on private capital flows rather than official forms of finance, and those private capital flows in turn are more skewed towards certain countries, and they're also more, excuse me, they're more short-term in their orientation, and they're also highly volatile. Development aid, while it has increased quite a lot over the past decade, for many countries it's actually fairly marginal. It's less important than it used to be, except of course for the least developed countries and some small island developing states where it's still a major source of external finance for them. Aside from the shifts in the financing landscape, I think the nature of the challenges that we face post-2015 have also changed from the MDG period. The MDG period was characterized very much by a focus on national development priorities, with a particular emphasis on improvements in social outcomes, social indicators. I think we're likely to see the post-2015 period characterized by a lot more emphasis on the cross-border nature of the collective challenges we face. And of course, the challenges posed by climate change are particularly important and recognized as especially urgent here. So what role for innovative sources of development finance in this whole mix, in this new landscape that we now have, and especially the financial transaction tax? I think perhaps we should be a little honest at the risk of offending some people. Despite the potential shown by some schemes so far, the airline ticket tax would be one, the financial transaction tax another. Despite the potential shown by them, the schemes we've seen implemented so far have been extremely small in size and in scope, which I think is a pity because they really do have a lot more potential to play in the post-2015 era. A multitude of studies have already attested to the technical feasibility of financial transaction tax. Studies have played around with a range of scenarios as regards which financial transactions to cover, which to exclude, what percentage rate to tax those different financial transaction tax, which currencies or countries to include, exclude. We have so many studies, in so many scenarios at the lower and the higher end of the spectrum. None of that needs to be revisited now. What is lacking is fundamentally political will. And how can we build that political will into the post-2015 conversation? I think that's the question that we need to ask ourselves. And how can we perhaps balance ambition with pragmatism? So perhaps what should we demand for with respect to innovative sources of finance and the financial transaction tax in the post-2015 era? I think the cross-border nature of the challenges that I was referring to earlier lends itself well to cross-border innovative financing initiatives, actually. The financial transaction tax also has considerable public support across a wide range of countries. But we also need a clear commitment to allocate a proportion of the revenues raised to international development. And so far, that has not happened. I think perhaps for obvious reasons in the EU, despite the recent very welcome announcement that 11 countries within the European Union plan to implement a financial transaction tax over the next year. So far, only France has announced a commitment to allocate a proportion of that 10% to development, and it's unclear whether that will be in addition to current resources allocated to aid, or whether it will substitute for declining levels of aid through normal channels. So how can we build political consensus around a financial transaction tax, or to scale up other sources of innovative financing for development? I think at the risk of being a voice in the wilderness, or at the risk of offending some of my civil society colleagues, I wonder whether there is scope to call for more countries to implement the financial transaction tax, and for more countries to rally around the magic number of 10%. I think there is considerable public support for a financial transaction tax, as I mentioned earlier, but it's always challenging when initiatives are implemented at the national level to allocate a significant proportion of those resources to ventures or to initiatives outside the country. But what scope is there to rally around the 10% number and call for developed and developing countries alike to implement some form of financial transaction tax to be determined at a national level, and then to a political commitment for 10% of resources to help fund the post-2015 framework? I think that would be something worth having. If people believe that that is something that is fundamentally not viable, well, I perhaps challenge colleagues in the Latin America region, for instance. What about countries within a specific region, or a set of like-minded countries come together and develop their own financial transaction tax, or their own airline ticket tax, or whatever sort of innovative financing mechanism they like, and they work together at a regional level, and they implement something together, putting developing countries, emerging economies in the driving seat, developing it themselves, deciding which regional priorities they want to fund, governing the mechanism themselves. I think, and again, that would be really something quite progressive and something really worthwhile having, and could be something that other countries and other regions could look to for as a good example. So I'll stop there. I think there are so many opportunities on the table that can be explored in the context of the conversation on post-2015. We're living in very challenging times, but I think we're also living in very exciting times. New technologies have really revolutionized the way we can collect resources from citizens, the private sector, anybody. I think there's a lot more awareness of citizens in development and so on. So I think the International Finance Facility for Immunization has shown that we can harness financial engineering for positive ends as well. So I think there's a lot to build on if we think creatively and think a little bit outside the box. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you to the ambassador. I know that he's busy with another commitment, so thank you again to the mission for the support and your presence here. And thank you, Gail, for your intervention. And civil society we don't like the 10%, but we wouldn't mind a 10% of a trillion. So since
Or
we
a
talk about or whatever it is, because I don't get it. So I think that you posted very clearly what is the question, how to finance the post-2015 agenda. I think that we are having a very interesting and substantive debate at the global level, and UNDP is one of the leaders that about what's this agenda and how this agenda should be implemented. But as the ambassador knows, the Spanish ambassador, I'm Catalan, so if there is no money, there is no sense to talk about the agenda in this sense. So I think it's important that we have this linkage, and if we are serious when we're talking about the post-2015 agenda, we have to find the ways. And it's not that innovative financing should solve everything. It's a part of this agenda because it's a complementary part of the agenda, but this is a very important question. You have been developing a series of questions, and then you touched the golden thing, the question of political will, which is, we have been, all of us in many debates and side debates, and we always get to the political will question. No? So it's very important we see how to evolve in this way, and especially with the substantive proposal of all this domain, which is the financial transaction tax. You have done a specific proposal to civil society on how to organize our campaigning, so we will discuss about your proposal, and I ask here civil society also to interact regarding that. You know that the 10% is not a very nice number for us, but it's something to take into account. And then you have been also mentioning the Latin American dimension, and in this sense I think that we have to say that from Ubuntu, together with Funglode, and with a certain support of the Spanish Agency for Cooperation and Development, precisely we are working to see how we could expand the innovative financing agenda from the right point of view. I mean, focusing on the substantive questions in the Latin American dimension. So thank you for focusing that, and we hope that if we manage to expand this exercise, that we will be able to do it together with the UNDP. Okay. Then the next speaker we have here in the panel today, it's Matt Simons. He's coming he's an economic and social, from the Economic and Social Policy Unit of the International Trade Union Confederation, and he's representing about 100 million people through the e-took, so you have to be very careful.
Yeah, millions and billions today.
Exactly, so you have to be very careful what he's going to say, because, at this moment is the one who's representing more people in this room. So thank you again to the e-took for the collaboration we're having with them for this and other issues, and the floor is yours.
First, thanks to Manuel, the government of the Dominican Republic, Ubuntu, and GFDD for organizing and inviting the ITUC to participate in this meeting. As Manuel has mentioned, we're our organization with a membership of 170 million, I think, in 315 national trade union centers in over 150 countries. So we have quite a large and far-reaching membership. For my part, I coordinate the ITUC's input into the post-2015 sustainable development debates, and have been doing so since about October, when the high-level panel had its first meeting in London. So in this respect, I'm going to focus a little bit more generally my comments on kind of financing a progressive post-2015 sustainable development agenda, and I guess in that sense make the case for financial transactions tax or some other sort of innovative source of financing. So as I've said, we've been participating in these debates since they commenced, but had most recently in the Open Working Group on Sustainable Development, which took place in June of just a few months ago. And we've been active in Rio and Busan and Doha and New York and so on. So we've been following this agenda for quite some time. So some really positive takeaways so far from the Open Working Group process, to a lesser extent, I think, from the high-level panel report. Civil society is very well mobilized around these processes and has a very, very broad array of proposals that I think are generating broad support from governments and across stakeholders and so on. So I think that's very interesting. From our organization, we're pushing for 2 standalone goals on the decent work agenda and on social protection through the implementation of social protection floors at a national level. And so it's quite understandable that some of the feedback we're getting from governments is, how do you pay for this? This is quite a extensive and, I guess they say a Christmas tree of proposals that we want to have in as future commitments in which will comprise a post-2015 sustainable development agenda. But resources are quite limited. So what is the expectation here in terms of how to fund it? And obviously, we don't live in a bubble. We recognize that resources will have to be mobilized. I mean, if we just look at one of our proposals on trying to finance social protection floors in country, this is quite a significant expense. What we're thinking is you have something sort of like a multilateral fund, I guess something like the Global Fund, where you have contributions from multilateral levels into a fund that is then distributed and kind of technically supported from, I don't know, an agency like the ILO. Of course, it would still have to be resourced. So then the question is how. So in this respect, we have the financing for development agenda with its traditional pillars, or 6+ pillars of development financing. I guess the plus is the innovative sources. And then the recently commenced financing for sustainable development work. And we recognize that they have major challenges to address. So I would just maybe share some of our reflections when we look at the IFfD portfolio on development financing. It covers pretty much the full gamut of sources of financing, but there still remains quite large shortfalls in the financing, and so the challenges persist. So I think I'll just run through a few of these, run through the traditional forms and kind of share our reflections on this. So when we look at trade and employment, this is a very complicated issue. And while maybe there's some agreement that trade generates employment, it doesn't generate quality employment. So in the deadlock, the WTO is in a deadlock. We heard just in the room over the last session. There's quite a bit of hopes being put on this meeting in Bali in December, and I guess the new presidency. But trade is one of those areas where it still has a lot to show, I suppose. On foreign direct investment, there's FDI has positive implications on kind of GDP, generally speaking, but I guess the question, does it demonstratively show positive developmental impact? And in terms of job creation, I think the evidence it's very mixed, especially when you're looking at where large, significant portions of FDI are going, and specifically into the primary commodity sectors, extractive industries, and so on, which have, not great implications in terms of creating employment and so on. Domestic resource mobilization was obviously of utmost importance, and I think for national governments, this is one of the ones. This is their highest priority. But it's also probably one of the most challenging areas, especially in terms of trying to develop kind of capable tax administrations while also fighting illicit flows and getting rid of tax havens and so on. ODA is fundamental, but it's really the only form of development finance that kind of has the sole purpose of trying to lift people out of poverty and create decent livelihoods and so on. But it's shrinking, and we heard in this last meeting there's a question of whether or not they reopen the ODA definition. I sit in Paris and I follow what the Development Assistance Committee does, and this is going to be a very contentious debate within. It's within, at the DAC itself, it's a contentious debate, and I think civil society is probably not so excited about the idea of reopening the ODA definition to take in sort of other official flows or something like this. And then finally, it's very small. It's a drop in the bucket compared to the rest of development finance, and then it's not always delivered effectively. Debt, I think my colleague to the right has much more to say about debt than I do. Oh, no? Okay. Well, I think there's experts on debt much more so than myself, but imagine that the picture is not very rosy. And then policy coherence is obviously something we support, but I think, you know, it begs the question, if you go to a government and ask who's the first in line in the priority, if it's the finance minister, the trade minister, or the development minister, I think that's a question we all have. So clearly we face a situation where we need to improve first the impact of the traditional forms of development finance, and this should be an imperative and should in no way kind of distract. We should not distract from this question when we're talking about an FTT. But at the same time, there's an obvious and very urgent need to explore different avenues to raise the necessary resources to fulfill our current and future commitments. I just take a tangent here that there's this notion that the private sector is going to swoop in and save the day, and people are, you know, the champions are citing, for example, public-private partnerships, which we have not really shown any consistent developmental impact. You have this question of ODA leveraging private finance, which I think is fairly problematic. So I'm not going to sit here and say that the private sector is not going to be critical to a post-2015 development agenda, because it is, but I don't think that we can expect realistically that this is going to be the answer to some of the major questions that we have. So this is all to say that I think there's a case for the financial transactions tax. And as mentioned, the technical feasibility studies have all been done. It's by if not all accounts, most accounts, technically feasible. I think there's strong support from governments, from stakeholders, from pretty much all corners for, you know, at a political level. There's major financing gaps that need to be filled, so it seems like a perfect kind of confluence of factors to say that, you know, there should be a broadly levied FTT that is then distributed in some other way that can be hotly debated afterwards. So from the unions, we strongly support it, obviously. We would agree that it's probably not very innovative or new. Quite frankly, if we put it simply, it's basically asking corporations and high net worth individuals to pay their taxes. So as we continue to grow unequal and inequality increases, and continues to worsen, we think globally implemented financial transactions tax is an important tool first for redistribution, and also can play a vital role in sort of paying for the global public goods that we'll need to fulfill a post-2015 sustainable development agenda.
Thank you also very much, Matt, for your intervention and focusing on the post-2015 agenda and commenting several substantive elements and all the question about the other mechanisms, but also about ODA and this alarm regarding the possibility of reopening the debate about the ODA definition and the need to debate all this question about the role of private sector. I think that none of us would say that we are against that private sector has a role to play, but again, if we want to be serious about what we are talking about, we have to be very clear that if there is something to address, is the central role of the public sector. And at the end of the day, you said that FTT is not that innovative. I think that some French people would be a bit upset about this statement, but I think that you are quite realistic, because at the end of the day, we're just asking some people to pay a micro tax, because at the end of the day, the FTT is a very micro tax, and I think that's quite substantive and interesting to take into account. Okay, now it's time for Eva. Eva hands, well, you know that I never managed to, yeah? Okay, Eva. And, well, she could be delivering a full seminar about the question, but for 2 weeks. But unfortunately, we don't have the 2 weeks for the seminar. And, well, today here she is as board director of the Social Justice in Global Development, but in one way or another is also representing the NGO committee. The NGO committee is very well represented here, but, well, I think that it was also interesting to have you speaking. You could speak on your own behalf, but you're speaking also in this context. So thank you very much, Eva.
I also speak on behalf of another organization I recently joined, which is Bread for the World, in German Brot für die Welt, a big development organization that works in about 100 countries with partners in the south. And we are just happy that we are also a member of ACT Alliance, and the UN liaison person is here, a network of 150 organizations worldwide. So that's an opportunity also to promote this issue in a much broader issue. Well, with the Financing for Development Committee, we're working since many, many years, since the beginning, but also with worldwide organizations who happen not to be here at the UN so often, just a few delegations sometimes, and with the link of the UN liaison officer. Now, on the FDT, yes, I'm working on this since 95 or so, in different capacity. But now, in this presentation, just to make it short, I focus on what has happened this year in Europe, because that is something nobody else mentioned, and it shows you where the political will is going to. This year in January, it began with a very moving start for all of us for the financial transaction tax, as the European Union gave a green light for 11 countries to implement the FTT. Now it's 12 countries because Croatia is joining this initiative. And it was seen as a huge step forward, and we still hope, that the tax could be implemented as early as in January 2014. The money would provide vital funds, and we are lobbying on that in Europe, in Germany, but also in European countries, that the money would pay for healthcare and education at home in our countries, but also help people in the poorest countries, meaning to add to ODA, and also fight climate change, was mentioned before. This decision was made possible when European finance ministers voted in favor of it, with 23 votes for it and 4 abstentions. I come to the abstentions in a minute. The European Commission then produced a formal proposal to shape the discussions among the 11, or now 12, to decide on the modalities on exactly what the FTT in Europe should look like. The smart design and scope of the proposal makes it extremely difficult for financial institutions to avoid paying the tax. That was a major opposition everybody claimed against it, and especially people in the IMF. It won't matter where in the world the trade takes place. All appropriate trades will be subject to the tax. So it matters where it's designed, well, accredited in which country the company is, but not where the tax is traded. However, this summer, Luxembourg and especially the UK mounted a legal challenge to the European FTT, meaning they went to court, the European Court, against it. And a few weeks ago, also the legal department of the EU warned that such a tax would offend European law. This legal challenge tries to reverse the decision made in January at the finance ministers' meeting. Why? Simply because in Luxembourg and in UK you have the financial sector, the London City, and they tried to protect this sector. That's all. And this is even against the people's wish in Britain, because there's a broad Robin Hood initiative. And why do they want it to be annulled, to avoid it? Well, the private sector's opposition, especially against the extraterritoriality of the tax, I just mentioned it. This means that the financial sector is upset that the tax will cover transactions outside the 12 European countries who are implementing the FTT. In other words, the foreign companies might end up paying the tax. However, this is hypocritical. The UK, our UK colleagues, NGOs are saying, because the UK already has an FTT on share transactions, the so-called stamp duty, which brings £3 billion a year, and everyone has to pay it wherever in the world they come from. So they have it, and they are now, going to court in the EU against the other 12 countries who want to implement a similar tax. Well, NGOs European-wide say, including Ubuntu, right, that this legal challenge is morally wrong and threatens to derail the entire process of the FTT in Europe. And this happens in time of austerity in Spain and Greece. UK and Luxembourg, to us, seem choosing to give up billions that could help protect public services in Europe and put the EU economy on the road to recovery. So they're objecting to this. So what happens next? The participating countries, well, the 12, will meet every month to discuss the European Commission's proposal with a view to reach an agreement this summer. I mean, this year still. Just to mention also about funds, we're talking about an FTT worldwide, and I recommend also, I remind you to the leading group, and there was a committee in the leading group, we heard that several times. One proposal seemed very valuable for us, and we should promote that too and lobby for that, is to establish a global solidarity fund for public global goods, and the achievement of the Millennium Goals or climate change adaptation and mitigation. I will end my remarks with two voices who are for the tax. You know, we don't know what the outcome in Europe is. We asked Germany, what's the German position in this? And our government, it still has to be built in a few weeks. We don't have it yet, right? It's just the old government in place, so we hope we get a little bit of different shape. But still, our finance minister says they will stick to it and promote the FTT. So they are fighting this challenge of the UK. So we have trouble there in Europe. But to the Americans here, I will quote even Paul Krugman, who argued that such a tax would be a trivial expense for people engaged in the foreign trade or long-term investment. So it's just a minor, 0.0 something. But it would be a major disincentive for people trying to make a fast dollar, or euro or yen, by outguessing the markets over the course of a few days or weeks. And even the IMF has previously argued for an alternative levies on banks. And in a most recent paper, they concluded that on an FTT, that in principle, an FTT is no more difficult and in some respects easier to administer than any other taxes. So we think now it's high time for other countries to join our initiative and support a global FTT, and that's why I'm very happy that I'm here and the initiative of your organization and country to do this. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I think that's important that we have this knowledge of what's going on in Europe, because up to now it has been Europe who has been leading this process. And also thank to the European civil society, which has been pushing for that for a long time, and the base is expanding. Now Croatia is joining, so this has a future, and then the discussion of the use of funds, which is an important question that we need to confront and also to see that sometimes. But this is not the only case in which some use of justice is done in order to try to move what has been the legitimate process and the legitimate political process to go there. And then you have also underlined the question of the Global Solidarity Fund, which was one of the proposals by the leading group, by the report which was prepared by the series of people. And because this is very important, I mean, when we talk about complementarity, how we can ensure this kind of complementarity. And I think that in this sense, even if the size is small in comparison to the global needs, Unit 8 has been a very good example. As you know, Unit 8 is the system by which these taxes or these levies on plane tickets this money goes to the Unit 8 mechanism, which is based together with the World Health Organization in Geneva, and it's this global dimension which uses this kind of revenues in order to have their own policies. And this is important because if we would end in a system in which the FTTs are taken at the national level, and then from the national level it's the national governments which are implementing or using the revenues, it would be much easier that then this complementary question and additionality question that it's so central in the financial transaction tax would not be taking place. So thank you again for your intervention. Now, the panelists have been already speaking, and well, I know that we have several people that have a lot of opinion here. We have the people of the NGO committee. We have also Ambassador González de Linares from Spain that he told me he was coming to listen, but we have him here, so in case he wants to make any kind of mention. And we have people from the new school also here who are joining us today, and I got to know that maybe we had also some people from the Open Society. So now the floor is open, and I think that, well, we have been addressing substantive issues, so please, we want to know your opinion about the 10%, we want to know your opinion about the provocative statements by UNDP regarding what civil society should be doing and what we have been commenting here. So the floor is open. So please, the new school.
I'm also here in the capacity of social justice and global development. No, I want to ask a question to you, Manuel, to the Spanish representative, to others here. The MDGs were targets for developing countries, right? Sustainable Development Goals, I don't know if it's decided yet, but are they supposed to be global or just for developing countries? And since we kind of like 20-year anniversaries, 2015 is also 20 years since Copenhagen, the social summit, which had global goals, like unemployment, you know. So FTT can raise significant amounts of money if 10% goes for international, you know, support of development. How about a section for domestic support of the social goals that are undoubtedly significant in whatever becomes the Sustainable Development Goals? Thank you.
Okay. Well, what I would say is that, I mean, for instance, Eva, she has been mentioning the Robin Hood tax campaign that we support as Ubuntu and the work we have been doing together. And we always have mentioned that the question is that the financial transaction tax revenues should be not only for international cooperation, but also for social domestic dimensions. And I think that this goes in line with what you are proposing. For me, it's very difficult to say it has to be also devoted to Sustainable Development Goals, because up to now I don't know what are the Sustainable Development Goals. And first, I prefer to see the list, and I prefer to see if I agree not only on the goals themselves, but on the way these goals have been discussed and have been agreed, and the kind of complementarity and they have with the post-2015 agenda. Because here we have to confess that we have a bit of chaos, let's be clear, about what's going to happen with the two agendas. So I think that from a civil society point of view, it's clear that the FTT, at least for us, should be for that. I mean that many governments, they see the FTT as something very interesting to go to public debt or to go to this kind of questions. I'm sure that at the end of the day we will have to make an agreement, and the governments, they have a bit of much more power than civil society to decide over these agreements, but I think that substantive dimension should be for this domestic and for these international questions. And then we still are in the process of the SDGs, so we have to see what happens with the SDGs, and then we will see whether civil society is supporting that part of these revenues go there or not, because you know what happened in Rio +20 regarding the green economy debate and how this ended, and there was not a very clear agreement whether we were supporting this green economy question. So sometimes we pretend that we forget what happened last summer and it's not that far away. So we really need to know exactly what is the framework. And I think that up to now also civil society has been, with all the questions and all the debates, as Ubuntu, we are also part of the Beyond 2015 campaign with all the process of definition of the post-2015 agenda, but we have been felt more involved in this one than in the SDGs one. And precisely, I have here with me the joint letter that we also signed, but it was proposed by CITSE and the Third World Network, precisely being a bit critical on how civil society has been not involved enough in the SDG process. So I think that there are many questions to be solved here, and part of it is about the final definition of these goals, but also on the process of these goals, civil society has still many things to say. Okay?
I can say a few words in response to Barry's question. A global agenda versus an agenda for developing countries. As far as I understand, and I'm sure I'm not privy to the most recent information at all, but there is an agreement for a single universal agenda. I think there's political consensus around the need for a single unified agenda that sort of integrates the discussions on post-2015 with the discussions on a set of sustainable development goals, because at the moment they've sort of been on parallel tracks. So there's definitely political consensus around the need and the desire to merge those. What finally emerges from the discussions is still unclear. It's probably safe to say that poverty will remain a core focus. I think the eradication of extreme poverty in particular will feature quite strongly. But I think the issue is that the geography of the problems that the world faces has shifted over the past couple of decades. The problem now is unsustainable development. So the location of the problem that we face is as much in developed countries as it is in developing countries. And to be honest, the distinction between developing countries and developed countries is increasingly blurred and possibly even obsolete. There are countries that have been growing extremely well recently and playing an increasingly prominent role in international affairs, both politically and economically. We've seen that in theory there are separate international commitments or international targets on aid and on climate finance. On aid, the UN target, the long-standing target to allocate 0.7% of GNI to aid has been around since 1970, and there are the recent Copenhagen commitments on climate finance. But in practice, financing for climate change related activities is counted as aid, and funding for global public goods is counted as aid. So I think we're likely to see increasing pressure on the aid pot as a result of climate change related activities, as a consequence of the need to also fund global public goods. So I think there needs to be some sort of urgent discussion now. And whatever the conceptual and practical difficulties, I don't see a way around it, that there has to be a clear demarcation of funds for aid, funds for climate, and funds for global public goods, and clear targets around those. And those targets could apply to everyone, but on the basis of common but differentiated responsibilities. And I appreciate that there are many conceptual and practical difficulties with that, but I'm not really certain how else we can get around that.
Yeah. So,
I have a question for you. Okay, panelist to panelist. Now, I'm just curious, after you described the process, and I know you've been following it so closely, are we now in a quagmire, or is it going to move forward? Is there any timeline? Is there any schedule? What's going to happen? Is it possible it will just fall through after they went to the court, or?
Well, it's a big question mark. So it was just an opinion of the legal department of the EU. But the commissioner, I mean, Barroso also is still for the tax. The commission was for the tax, and the parliament too. And we do not know what are the next steps. That's a question, how do the countries behave now? And in our country, I belong to the national financial transaction tax steering group of NGOs, and we have to wait until our government is set up in order to talk to the people again. Because in former time there was the, what is it so-called, neoliberal, very small party in coalition with the middle party, the CDU, and after the election we voted them out. So they had a big influence. These were the financial sector people, and they had a big influence in our government, especially on those policies in the financial area, so finance ministry, and this could change. So we hope this changes. But therefore we have to wait until the new government is formed. That could be even November. And then the next step is to talk to them, and we'll see what initiatives they... I think it's all waiting for Germany to come on. And then we have to watch and see, and perhaps do another European campaign. I can encourage you. We have started in Europe a 1 million signature campaign. You can explain more. We are part of that, and even on our website and Bread for the World. So act the lines. We're collecting signatures to support financial transaction tax in Europe in this time of uncertainties.
Well, as Eva has commented, I think that, after such a long process with such strong support from civil society, from the academia, even from the financial sector, I remember we had an event in the year 2011 in Paris at UNESCO, and we had the head of the French authority for financial markets, and he clearly said that the tax was necessary and the tax was possible, and that those who were against the tax, they were lying about their arguments against that, and it was not. It was the head of the financial authorities of France during the time of President Sarkozy, so we could not be accused. And even we had a member of the Rothschild family from the Rothschild Bank supporting this tax, and we have this very strong support. So I think that we are in this moment of the process in which, of course, the situation in Europe is complex. We had elections in Germany. The situation of the French president is not the best he could expect, so the leadership from France has its own problem, and then we have the traditional way of certain actors to try to influence. But I think that these actors, well, I think that they will not be in a position to overcome what has been the legitimate work of several countries, that now it's increasing because Croatia is joining. It would be quite strange to have Croatia joining something which is about to fall in pieces. It's also true that some months ago we had the European Central Bank saying we want to help the Commission to design and technically support this process of the financial transaction tax, and we clearly know when the European Central Bank wants to help you, it's like like a big bear coming to you. I want to help you, So we know what it was behind that, but and the Commission stood very firmly, saying no, we have we have enough people at the Commission to design the tax. So I think we are here in this battle. It's clear that there is this campaign that is being led by Oxfam now about the 1 million signature petition, and there is a mobility. It's Oxfam with the support of the Robin Hood, but doesn't matter. Robin Hood, Oxfam, and Ubuntu, and everybody will support this 1 million signature campaign, and others. And I have Rosa there who asked for to speak, so I think that she will add some aspects.
Rosa Lizardi with the Feminist Task Force group of the Global Call to Action Against Poverty. I don't know if I'm going to add much commentary to this, but I do want to add a question around this new innovative financing, which is called remittances. It's been around for a while, and so I'm very curious to hear from Eva, just talking about the FTT and how it's not moving, and the other panelists also just, about this urgent discussion that we need to have, and this coming on the heels of the high-level conference on migration last week, where the issue of remittances has come up as that is now the innovative financing that the governments from the north are looking to. We heard Mr. Kituyi, the Secretary General of UNCTAD, this morning say, I mean, that was like the brightness in what everyone was saying. Everything else is, you know, not being fulfilled, and then in the area of remittances, he said that there's been a mild increase in remittances. And we see that the governments from the north are seeing remittances as this is what we're going to use for infrastructure. This is what we're going to use to finance development now. So I'm curious to hear from the panelists, you know, what your views are, what you're hearing in Europe, you know, and perhaps the delegate from Spain, you know, if there's information there that you can share with us. You know, we also heard the head of the G77 this morning say that he's asking for a reduction in the transaction costs of remittances for governments from the global south. So I just want to introduce this issue that I think is, you know, certainly last week we were discussing it in the Global Migration Conference, and hear your views on that. Thank you.
Thank you. So, Eva?
Remittances does not play a big role for Germany because we don't have so many contacts. I mean, this has, the reason is also history. For Spain, this is totally different. So that's a huge issue for Spain. Therefore, Manuel can tell you that. Just to remind you on the IFfD history, remittances, the issue was brought in by the US when the financial at that time, currency transaction tax or Tobin tax was mentioned in order to bypass the attention. So it was the whole issue of innovative resources, you remember that in 2000 was just to you know, dilute the whole thing on the Tobin tax. So remittances was also one which is more harmless. It's important for some countries, and I don't diminish that. But you also have to remind these are private transfers. These are transfers by families, by workers, men and women, back to their families. You cannot use it as a state for development in a country. So when you talk about long-term investment for infrastructure, you cannot use the private money of some workers for their families. So that's a totally different issue. And it doesn't replace the fight we are fighting for ODA to keep the 0.7 promises, and in addition to have an FDT and debt, whatever, relief. This is a different concept. Remittances is important, and we need to have a reduction of transaction costs, no question.
Yes, please.
Okay. Thanks, Manuel. Remittances, they're on the increase. They're shown to be a more stable source of finance for families. They suffered less of a decline than other sources of private capital flows during the recent financial crisis. There are many encouraging examples of countries trying to tap into diaspora wealth more actively. Ethiopia and Kenya, for instance, recently issued sovereign bonds targeted at the diaspora. The diaspora bonds they sort of rely to some extent on the patriotic discount and on the willingness of the diaspora to perhaps accept a lower rate of return than they would do so through investing in private capital markets more generally. So Ethiopia and Kenya recently issued diaspora bonds as a useful source of complementary funds for infrastructure development. They certainly can't fund infrastructure in their entirety, but can perhaps provide a useful complement. I know there are commitments from several governments to work towards reducing costs for migrants to send remittances home, and that's welcome as well. I recently travelled to Rwanda, and Rwanda has an interesting initiative. They've set up a national development fund, and they're trying to encourage the diaspora to invest in this national development fund. The resources will be earmarked for particular national development priorities and encourage them to support national development. Back home is another interesting initiative there, which I'm sure other countries can learn from. I would perhaps like to echo the points just raised by Eva. I see them as a complementary source of funds for development and not as a panacea. I don't think they can substitute for increasing levels of public resources for development. Ultimately, this wealth is privately owned, as Eva mentioned, and as such, the owners can spend these funds as they best see fit.
To address it from the point of view of the experience of the Dominican Republic and a little bit what I know from Latin America. Remittances have been mentioned as a development tool a long time ago. It's a really old issue, very old issue. It feels like it's being brought up to the surface, as Eva was saying, a little bit to divert the attention. And there is a lot of work done, if for anybody interested in it, by Inter-American Dialogue, a think tank located in Washington, D.C. They have a program on remittances, and they do publications on remittances. They literally monitor yearly everything that goes on in remittances, the flows, the improvement in transactions and everything. And two things have been happening in last maybe 2 decades. There was an effort to use more efficiently that private money in Latin American countries, and there are some good programs that you can find, which was not using the private money for public purposes, but something completely different, which is working with the people receiving money from the diaspora and giving them opportunities for better investment in education and infrastructure and home ownership and things like that. The other effort that has been done was to reduce the fees on the transactions, because the idea was not to take it from the private ownership, but to take it from financial institutions. And then we got into the same obstacle we get with FFTs, which is you clash with the financial institutions that don't want to give that percentage. So we come back to the same point. But yes, it's a good complementary way, and it should be continued to be discussed.
Well, for the sake of the debate, we have 2 questions here, so one there, and maybe we take both of them together just because of the time, if you are fine.
My name is Sally Dunn, and I'm on the NGO Committee on FFD here in New York. And I'm also on the NGO Committee on Migration. And I guess I would just like to say very quickly that many of us in civil society, when the topic of remittances comes up, get a little agitated, a little worked up, because there is hardly ever any discussion about the idea that perhaps one of our goals ought to be to reduce the need for people to migrate and then send money back home. So to talk about the fruits of the labor from people who have had to make the gut-wrenching decision to leave their families and their homeland and go elsewhere in order to earn money to support their families and send that money back, to talk about that in the discussion of development is in my opinion, something that we ought to stop doing. I think our goal ought to be to minimize the need for people to migrate elsewhere to support their families. Thank you.
My name is Celine Paramunda. I represent the Medical Mission Sisters and also a member of NGO IFfD. I have nothing against FTT or remittances, but my question is about how to close the loopholes of these tax havens. Natasha has given, OECD has pointed out $5 to $7 trillion that goes to tax havens. If we close that loopholes, that is enough money for the development in each country, especially in developing countries. Oxfam has said $50 billion every year developing country is losing for these tax havens. So we don't need to tax extra from anybody if these people can give their proper share of taxes.
Thank you. Okay, you want to? Yes.
First of all, Sally, you're totally right. I support.
Oh.
Okay. Now, Sally, you are right. I support your approach, and that's why we support development in the countries. That's the first goal. We do those operational organizations like my new one, actually there are others. That's the first goal, of course. It is just, the question of Rosa, I understood if there is migration and if so the question of transaction cost of remittances. But the second question, yes, on tax havens. We all question the G20, the G20 as a group, as a body. But this time in St. Petersburg, was the one area where they really took good decisions. So just go to the website. I can send you the link about the attachment, the additions to their declaration. The declaration is just, words. But in the attachments, there come concrete proposals. And they agreed on that because most G20 members need the money. And they can't advance on the FTT because of the strong opposition. So they found this area, closing tax havens. And there they are active. And they are taking steps. So this is the area where I see the best move in the next 1 or 2 or 3 years.
I'll respond quickly to the second question. I don't feel qualified to answer on the migration issue. I need my colleague Sarah here. On tax avoidance, I'm hugely encouraged that this area has a lot more attention now than it did even 2, 3, 5 years ago. I agree with Eva that the G20 has made good progress in St. Petersburg with its decision to move forward on automatic exchange of tax information. If that's implemented in full, if developing countries are given the support they need, I think that could be a hugely important contribution. And so now we need to keep going. I hope that there's a lot more awareness and recognition of this issue. I hope that doesn't dissipate. I think in the context of post-2015, we need to explore the full range of proposals to reduce illicit financial flows, to reduce instances of tax avoidance, and that includes looking at issues and proposals related to country-by-country reporting for multinational enterprises of profit, loss, sales, and so on per jurisdiction in which they operate, explore the rules around beneficial ownership, and so on. I think we have to explore the full range of options and try to keep pushing governments and keep pushing for political consensus around that. I think they're sort of the next steps in this.
Thank you very much. Well, we are about 5 to 3, and we were supposed to finish at 2:30. I know there is a last question there, and then I would just like to make I would also like to comment about, well, there is 2, so we will do 2 of them. I would also like to comment about tax havens. I will just remind that, for instance, Ubuntu supporting a campaign which is called Tackle Tax Havens by Tax Justice Network. And I think that what we are working together precisely, and the financial transaction tax has a dimension on global financial governance. You have mentioned that, and I have also mentioned that we here at the UN we have a lot of debates about global economic governance, but we don't have debates about how we can start global economic governance, and if we don't have global financial governance. And the financial transaction tax, by taxing these transactions, it has a part of this governance. So I think that it's totally in parallel to the tax haven issues, and of course it's a central one. We will make these last two ones, and then we will finish, because for the moment no one is complaining for the room. 2 years ago, I had the Security Council people saying, we need the room, we need the room. So this time we have more time, so, okay.
Grove Harris with the Temple of Understanding. The concern I have with this process and dialogue, and it may be because I'm not as experienced, is that there's no real sense of culpability of financial institutions for a global meltdown. So I'm wondering if anybody has done work around saying, why don't we do a financial transaction tax to reimburse for the bailouts and really create a moral position that I think is unassailable. So I wondered if you could help me with thinking that through a little bit.
From the Committee on Financing and Development. My question is about, it's the growing inequalities in every country. You know, this is one of the issues that's around there. I'm not sure to what extent it's really present, but it's how to harness that. You know, I mean, some of it is already included in what we're talking about, but other ways of looking at the inequalities within country, and especially the wealthier sector, how that in every country can be harnessed for the good of the whole country.
Okay. You don't, no?
You have the closing.
Okay, well, so thank you very much. I just wanted to mention, well, the inequalities. I mean, we need 2 weeks to discuss about that. So, I mean, we completely agree on what we are saying. And regarding the moral dimension, for instance, here at the US, you have a group, which is the National Nurses United, which is the union of nurses. They are working very much on the question of financial transaction tax, and they are the strongest one working on that. And they also work about this moral dimension. The only thing I would like to point out is that we don't want this money to go to the bailout. Be careful, because that's what now the national banks are trying to do. I mean, we already have sending tons of money for the bailout. Now, precisely the financial transaction tax is to use this money for social needs at home and abroad. So I agree with you with the moral dimension. And for instance, in the US, there is this group, they are working on that, and they have some videos which are quite fun, but also substantive, and they talk about this dimension. And then we also had some videos from the Robin Hood tax campaign. I would recommend you to go over them regarding this question, but be very careful. I mean, we don't want this money now to go again to the bailout. We want this money collected for the social agenda at home and abroad. Well, thank you very much to everybody. I think it was a very interesting panel. I just was, I mean, it's necessary for not only for protocol, but to be realistic, to thank again to the organizations which have been working on that, to Global Foundation for Democracy and Development, to all the team, but especially to Margaret, who has been working these last 2 weeks like mad to make this possible, and to the permanent mission of the Dominican Republic to UN, to Ubuntu, and to the other organizations, the NGO Committee, the International Trade Union Confederation, and Center of Concern. Thanks to the speakers. I think that they have been very interesting, all the interventions we had. But as I always say, especially thanks to you, because we can create the best panel, we can make the best title, we can make the best organization, but without people attending and interacting, this is not possible. I think that we don't have time now to make a resume of what we discussed, because it's 3 o'clock and we were supposed to finish. And what? So I think that your emails have been collected in the meanwhile, so we will try to make a resume of the most important topics we have been discussed today. I think that through your website, yes, you will also have the whole debate recorded, so you can follow up there. And well, we are in contact, and we continue to work that to ensure that the FTT is implemented in the 12 countries, and then it will be implemented in other countries, and in other countries, and in Latin America, and everywhere. Okay? Thank you very much. Natasha?
No, I just wanted to add, you can go to our website, which is on the brochures. It's www.globalfoundationdd, globalfoundationdd, 2 letters d.org, and then you will be able to see the video. It's going to be on YouTube, and also on our website you will be able to see the names of the speakers and the institutions. So if you want to get in touch with them, that's a way how to do that, and we hope to stay in touch with you. And my paper will be there as well. Yes, the presentation will be there as well. Thank you. Thank you all very much.
Thank you very much.